everybody for being here. Normally, we would be enjoying a good meal and good conversation at our picnic at this time of day. But unfortunately, COVID-19 decided to do a number on us, and we're here doing this. So that's why we didn't have a regular program scheduled. But one of the things we always seem to like at our regular meetings is a chance to visit with each other and ask questions. So we decided at least to kind of keep a little continuity at the club, just go ahead and have a meeting today, just a question and answer. And in just a second, I'm going to turn it over to Eric, and he's going to give you the roundup of how we're going to do this. And so, Eric, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks, Phil. So welcome everybody. I see we've got about 17 participants here, all of different ages and experience levels with keeping your bees. And as Phil said, normally at this time we would be having lunch and visiting together. And part of the benefit of that is getting to yak about what do you do for bees and what you've seen, what your concerns are, any issues you might be having. And so in an attempt to try to recover some of that, we're doing a question and answer session today, and this is how we're going to try it. And this is just a trial. It might blow up in our face. We're flexible, so we can pivot and try different things. But for starters, if you scroll down, or if you're on your phone, it's a touch screen at the bottom, there should be like a chat option. And it says chat, and it's got a little talking bubble, it looks like. You click on that, a Zoom group chat dialog box opens up, and you can see there's already been a couple of comments in there. Eli said hello, and Josh said hi. If you type in there a question that you have, or something that you would like the group to discuss, and I'm just going to chat for a while and fill up time and give everybody a chance to think of some questions and to start populating that group chat. Then what we'll do is I will kind of try to act as master of ceremonies and read the question, and we'll let folks in the group raise their hand and for an option of trying to give an answer to that in terms of folks who've got more experience or who have input that they'd like to share. At the bottom of the screen, you'll also see an opportunity to provide what's called a reaction. Again, if you're on your phone, maybe if you touch your screen at the bottom, you'll see a list of options, and one of them is a reaction. You click on that, there's an option to clap or give a thumbs up. Oh, Phil just gave a thumbs up, Josh just clapped. Yep, thumbs up, perfect. So if you give a thumbs up, I'm going to assume that that means that you're ready to answer a question, or you've got an answer that you want to give, and we can have you unmute and share to the group what your answer is going to be, or how you would frame the answer to that question, or maybe add to the discussion in some way. So we'll try that. If it doesn't work, right now everybody's set to be able to unmute themselves. So, if folks want to just start unmuting and talking over each other and let the normal laws of conversation drive, that we can try that too. But of course, I can always, if that doesn't work, I can always force mute everybody and unmute people one at a time. So that's another option. So if you're just joining us, if you want to discuss any options, it's August, so we're coming out of the honey flow. Everybody's flow should be done pretty much, and a lot of beekeepers, as you would have gathered from the Britz's presentation in July, a lot of folks have already harvested their honey, and they're in the process of bottling it or labeling it, or selling it, and that's sort of following the honey path where the honey goes. But we're not forgetting about our bees. There's lots of preparations that we need to be thinking about is going into the late, here we are in the late summer dearth, and for most folks that's I think For us, at least, it's a fall dearth as well. And so we're thinking about treatments, and we're thinking about overwintering. So I see we've got our first question here from Joe, first-year beekeeper with 5 in U.S. Maybe that's supposed to be nukes. 3 have been strong and into honey hives. 2 are still filling out their second brood box. Is that normal progress? So my understanding, Joe, is that this is your first year. You got, looks like maybe 5 nukes. 3 of those 5 got into the honey supers, and 2 are still filling out their second brood box. And you're curious, is that normal for them to still be filling up that second brood box? Who would like to take a stab at answering this question for Joe? Anybody? Well, I can start, and how about I say some things wrong, and then that'll really spur the people who know what they're talking about to jump in and not be quiet. So, Joe, I would say that in my experience, that would be normal. I'm interested in more detail. 2 are still filling out the second brood box. Does that mean that you've got 2 frames of bees in the second brood box, or does that mean you got 7 frames of bees in the second brood box? I think that there's different stages of transition there in terms of their population filling up. A lot of beekeepers, and when you talk to old timers, a lot of times they talk about weight, the weight of the hive, and they'll just sort of heft it and how heavy does it feel, and they'll use that to determine how strong they are going into winter. If you're light on bees and stores, right now checking their health in terms of varroa mite populations and hive beetles and all of that is going to be key to determining what's going on with them. But if everything's fine and they're healthy, your varroa mites have been treated for, and you don't see a lot of hive beetles in there, you might just need to throw some extra feed on and just get their weights up for winter time. So I would say that that's probably normal, but I'd like to know how many of your frames have bees on them, and I'd like to know the rough weight of your hive. Just sort of, is it, the target dumb number that most folks around here use is like about 100 pounds. Some say 80, 90, some say 120 is or more, but you're kind of trying to get somewhere in that 100-pound range to get colonies strong enough to make it through the winter. And about sorry to interrupt you, Joe, but about 10 frames of bees, solid with bees, comes out to about 20,000 bees, and that's kind of the dumb number again, average amount that you want to get through the winter.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that information.
Yeah, sure thing. Joe, since we've got you speaking now, do you have an idea about how many frames of bees in the upper deeps there, in the upper brood boxes?
I do not have that. That's something I'd need to check, and that's a good way to move forward with checking that out.
Okay,
yeah, strong, but they just haven't moved into a honey hive, so I just wanted to make sure I didn't need to do something for the winter.
I think that having nukes that haven't made it into the honey supers up above the brood boxes after starting them out as nukes this year, I would say is pretty common. I wouldn't be surprised at all if all of your hives filled up both brood boxes but didn't make it into the honey supers. Although this year everybody seems to have done really well with honey, so I guess if you're going to do well with nukes, this is going to be the year to do it. But it's not uncommon, in my opinion, for you to not get much honey in the upper supers for nukes this year.
Appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Joe. Anybody want to chime in before I move on to the next question?
I have a very stupid question. How do I send in a chat question?
Oh, sure. So first of all, are you on your desktop computer, or are you on a phone or a tablet?
On a desktop.
Okay, so on a desktop, if you move your mouse around, you're probably seeing like either one person talk at a time and the screen is changing, or you're seeing like a grid of squares with a bunch of people. And at the bottom of that, if you just move your mouse down, you'll see these sort of five or six options, and one might say participants, and one says maybe reactions or something, and one says chat. If you click that chat button that has a little bubble there, it should pop up a dialog box somewhere on the side somewhere. It kind of depends on how you got your computer set up, but that dialog box is like a thread of reactions and comments from different participants. And at the very bottom, you can read everything that everybody's written so far. And at the very bottom there's a type message here. You click your mouse in that spot and you can type your message, share it, and then hit enter, and it should post it for everybody to see. And Josh Millard, I see that you've got a question. What is the perfect spot for a hive? Great beginner question. Anybody want to tackle that one?
Let me add something to the question about where to put a hive. I've got a property which is about 5 acres, maybe an acre, a little more of woods in the back. So let's say I have 3.5 to 4 acres of open land where I cut the grass. Now, I put my hives towards the back, not into the woods, but near a couple of trees. The hives are in full sunlight, no shade, except perhaps in the early morning, there's a bit of shade from the woods, but the rest of the day, those hives are in the sun. The one thing that I found after a period of time was that my neighbors thought that my bees were taking their hummingbird fluid and sucking up on their hummingbird feeders. But there were a few bees, maybe I'd say 20 or 30 bees around there, but that wasn't really too many. So then, of course, the suggestion would be to make sure that you keep your bees as far away from the neighbors as possible. One day, I think maybe in the spring this year, I heard the little boy on the other side of me holler and scream and run to his mommy because I think he got stung by a bee. So you try to train your bees, I guess, to stay away from the neighbors.
That's great. Thank you, Bob. And Josh, just to add a little bit more context to Bob's answer there, the sunlight aspect is meant to help with the small hive beetles. So the idea is that the more direct sunlight you get to those hives, the less likely you are to have issues with small hive beetles. Now, I've heard plenty of people say they got their hives in full sun and their colonies still got slimed out with beetles. And there's plenty of people who keep hives in a fully shaded area and they act like they never have issues with small hive beetles. So, we're dealing with nature. I don't know of any direct scientific study that has been done to positively 100% confirm that direct sunlight all day long, absolutely helps or hurts with the small hive beetle problem. but there's a lot of people who think it does. I am one of those people, for the record, and all of our hives are also in full sun. I also like to have some sort of a northern wind break of some kind. So if there's a tree line that's like it's sort of a southern tree line, and there's trees to the north, and it's kind of clear and open and sunny to the south, I like to put my bees right up against that line so that they get protected from the cold air that comes from the north in the wintertime, and they get full sun all summer. And beyond that, think about your neighbors. I think that's great advice. So,
Yeah, I'd like to add a couple of things to that. I like the idea about the trees. The only problem I've run into, I've got a couple of hives down by the trees, and too much sun or too much shade, obviously. But one of the problems I had in the last couple of years with some storms, I've had limbs come down. I actually had the second year I had my top bar hive, I had a tree drop a big limb and knock the hive top off and everything. If you've got a place where you could put them where you have a lot of heavy shrubs and stuff like that on the north side, and not have trees, big trees hanging over them, it's probably a lot safer location. One of the things I understand too is also not have them in low locations where they would get chilled and stuff like that. But yeah, with the bright sun, good northern protection from the wind in the wintertime, those all help. And Josh, where you're at, you don't have to really worry about neighbors. I've seen your area, and you've got good location out there. You've got a perfect location. You've got nice heavy dense shrubs and stuff and on the north side, you could put hives right there, be in bright sun, but never have an issue with trees dropping on it. So having the big trees is really good unless they start dropping limbs on them. And this year has been really bad for that. I've had a lot of big limbs come down.
that's great. Thanks, Phil. One more thing about folks that are kind of out in the country. I've heard some issues with horses. If you've got horses in the area or neighbors' horses, I've heard something about the smell that horses give off mimicking the alarm pheromone. And so sometimes bees can get the wrong idea if horses are nearby and can start stinging them up. Again, that's not 100% scientific. Probably it's hard for me to imagine a world where some people with horses haven't kept bees, but and them intermingled to some degree and been okay. But I can say that from personal experience, I kept bees in an area where there was a horse, and the horse owner got upset because the horse was kicking and bucking and acting really weird one day, and she thought it was the bees, and so I moved those bees. So, and then if you go online and start searching for it, you can read some horror stories that are terrible about bees and horses. So, it's the internet, so take it with a grain of salt. This is my own anecdotal evidence, but something to think about if you're out in the country.
And another thing I've seen people been posting is if you're putting them in a pasture where there's cattle would like to rub up against them. And I've seen a lot of pictures where they've rubbed up against them and knocked them over. So if you're going to have an area where there's cattle, you need to have a fence around them. And speaking of fences, I've noticed there's more and more reports about the black bears in Missouri. I'm afraid that's going to be a problem around here one of these days, hopefully for a few years, but I think they're coming. Other questions?
Well, I still have a question about sending a question. I have typed it in the chat box, but I cannot find the enter key. I'm sorry, I'm so stupid.
Oh, no, that's fine. So it should be on your keyboard. And on your keyboard, the enter key is like if you look for the letter A and then look along to your right, the enter key is should be the last key in that.
Call return?
Yep, return will do. Yep, some keyboards say enter and some keyboards say return.
So for some reason, it will not send it. Can I just ask you a question?
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry.
We've had last spring, we had a lot of storms. I assume it was common. But what can we do next spring to reduce the swarming problem?
That's a great question. Might want to pitch in on that one.
Well, I can tell you my experience there is that I did splits, but I didn't, in a couple of them, I didn't split them quick enough. I noticed I had a bunch of swarm cells, and even though I got them split, they still swarmed on me. So the idea, I think, is you kind of keep eye on them and get ahead of them and make your splits before they start getting into the swarm tendency. Yeah, this year was really bad for swarms. I know I didn't have any for the last 2 years, and this spring I had 2 the same day. And that was after splitting. But as far as I understand it, Bob William, you can pop in on this too, but splitting is probably about the only way you can really cut down on swarms. There you go.
That is the only way you can cut down on swarms. And of course, you got, how do I say this? Anyway, it depends on how big the hive is. Sometimes you can split that hive 2 or 3 ways, and that'll help you going into the spring or later in the spring. And you can always combine them back when it gets close to the honey flow if need be, or you could use that those splits for producing brood for the other hives, and that would, you know, but I would only do that when it gets closer to the honey flow. I would combine the other brood back into the other hives, but yeah, splitting is the only way that you're going to be able to prevent the swarms.
Thank you.
Does that help, or did I just mumble a lot?
That was great, Bob. Thank you.
Yeah, something I've noticed, I've seen it several times on Missouri Beekeepers online. They're having swarms like last week even. What, you know, you're at the end of the honey season, everything, and they're swarming. Anybody have an idea how they could, what you could do this time of year to try to keep the swarming down?
Replace the queen.
Yeah.
You could, one of the things that happened is when you get into a dearth, there's, you know, they've got this big hive and not enough food to keep them going. So one thing you can do is start feeding them a little bit, and that'll keep them in the hive, and they won't think that they need to split and you know, go somewhere else and get more resources. But I mean, that's part of it. What else? Well, what else caused it? I couldn't tell you.
Since we're
But
talking
I know
about
if they're low on food stores, they will swarm.
thanks, Bob. Here's a question. I was going to do it this year, and I had bad experience with requeening. Do any of you just requeen on kind of a regular basis, like in the late summer after the honey flows over, to get a new queen in there to get the bees built up to go into winter? I mean, I don't have experience with that, but some of you have a lot more experience than that. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. Anyone? Like Ferris Bueller, anyone?
I did requeen one hive, and that's been probably a month ago. I got in there and they had 2 supers full, but they just looked like they weren't doing much at all. And then I tore it apart, and I didn't see the queen, and I didn't see any new brood. So I just requeened them. They can lose a queen at any part of the season, and it could be when you get into it, you lose it, and you don't know it for 2 or 3 weeks or however long that it takes you to get back into it. So yeah, I would requeen anytime up until it starts getting cold. After that, I would just combine hives.
I've heard some people that, you know, on a regular basis, they will requeen in the fall. Even if a queen that's a couple of years old, they requeen. I'm just curious if anybody did that on just a sort of regular basis, not in Bob's situation where you didn't see the queen.
I have not ever done that, Phil, and I am probably too partial and sentimental to my queens. But I understand for production purposes and to reduce swarming that it's a common practice, especially amongst commercial guys. And I would love to know more about that too.
Thank you. See, Mary had a question. Pops up about the ApiGuard.
Yeah, Mary, you don't look like a Mary, first of all, but we're we're thinking about using ApiGuard in September. As anybody has experience with it? Anybody want to chime in on this one?
I've never used it.
Me neither. I use Formic Pro in the fall, and then oxalic acid in like January, February when the brood numbers are way down. Nice thing about Formic Pro, you can put it on when you have honey supers on. You don't have to pull the supers. But I've never used ApiGuard. Oh. Don't see anybody else hopping on there. I see Josh has got a question on there about farm animals, like chickens and dogs.
Yeah, let's read it. Will bees disturb other farm animals like chickens and dogs, but not horses? I've seen my share of Facebook funny pictures of dogs having been stung that were a little bit too curious. I want to hop back to Mary's question earlier about ApiGuard. I did purchase ApiGuard for the first time this year, and I haven't started using it yet. But I like the idea of using it because I don't know how familiar you are with Randy Oliver, but he had a series of articles at one point about treating in a cycle where his thinking was if you treat one treatment is oxalic acid, and then the next treatment you use a Formic type product, and then the next treatment you use a thymol type product, or thymol, however you want to pronounce it, type product. All three of these are quote unquote natural in the sense that oxalic acid is what they call an organic acid, but it's found in some foods that we eat, and then formic acid kind of falls in the same category, and then thymol being a byproduct of the thyme herb. But these are quote unquote natural if you're trying to go a more like less chemically intensive method. And I liked the labeling on thymol because it gives I think a wider temperature window than Formic does, where Formic requires that you be between 85 and 55 degrees, I think, for treatment. I don't remember what the window was for thymol, but it was better. So I bought ApiGuard this year. I have not put it on yet, but I'm anxious to do it, and I'll report back to the group and see how we did. Back to Josh's question about bees disturbing other farm animals. I have had chickens twice now, Josh, and haven't had any issues with them. Sometimes I like to, this is a little bit grotesque, but if I have frames of, I see your thumbs up there, Mary, thank you. If I have frames of brood that I want to get rid of, like let's say, Josh, since you're asking beginners questions, I'm just going to like over explain, and if that is too much and you already know it, I apologize. But sometimes people will, as a type of Varroa treatment, they'll have a dedicated drone frame where the bees want to just lay drone eggs in there, and drone frames tend to attract Varroa mites. So the Varroa will go to the drone frame and lay their Varroa brood in all of the brood chambers for the drones, and then those beekeepers will pull the drone frame out once it's capped, and they'll cut those drone out. Well, those drone larvae are a super special treat for chickens. So you can feed that drone frame straight up to your chickens, and everybody will be better off for it if that's a treatment option that you would prefer. Also, we have dogs, and I've never had an issue with dogs and sharing water with the bees and getting stung themselves. But, our dogs are farm dogs, and they're a little bit brighter than, I don't know, what I would think of as a dog that's bred to be more an indoor type dog. So I can't really speak to that. But long story short, I haven't had any issues. Yep. Thanks, Josh.
So I have a response for the dog issue. We have a yellow lab and an Australian shepherd, and they have gone around our hives, but they learn very quickly because they both got stung when they got too close. And ever since then, they try to keep a safe distance away from them. The dogs usually learn quite quickly.
Thank you for that addition. Yeah, it sounds like you're in good shape, Josh.
You mentioned earlier about the people been harvesting honey. Have any of you run into problems getting containers for your honey? I guess not.
Phil, I can't answer that because that's not my end of the business. So once the honey leaves the hive, I don't know what happens. So I
No,
couldn't speak to it.
I meant as far as bottling the honey.
Right, finding bottles, right? I don't get involved in that.
Oh,
So
you don't? Who does that?
the boss.
Oh, has she been having problems getting containers?
I do not know. I can go
Oh,
ask her. But I haven't
that's
heard
okay.
anything about it.
Okay.
So far as I know, we've been getting our orders just fine from Man Lake, but it might just be that we got them early enough before everybody else started ordering their jars. But we've had a couple like lids and things on back order, but other than that, we've been pretty well stocked.
Of course, Sarah would know. Thanks for the input, Sarah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she knows better
One
than
of the things I saw today that a lot of people like to put it in the canning jars. And those are, I guess, a lot of people are canning this year, and this time of year especially. They're having a real hard time finding jars and stuff. Saw one person, they were offering a $2 basically fee if you'd return a quart canning jar to them so they would put honey in it. Yeah. Any other questions? Otherwise, this may be a short meeting.
Also, since almost everybody from the board meeting today is also here, if anybody has any questions regarding the club, now would be a good time to ask those questions.
Excellent.
Oh, here's a question right here from Joe. In the newsletter, Kyle Day noted that fall management required extra space for fall brood. I want to finish the year with 2 deeps after pulling the honey box. How do I manage this need? By replacing frames with new units or adding a 3rd deep? Great question, Joe. Anybody want to jump in on this one?
Well, I'll throw my 2 cents in. And I'm still a rookie at all this. I've had a couple of frames, a couple of hives that they filled the 2nd deep solid with honey. I mean, it's all I can do to lift it, and they're starting to fill the bottom one. So what I did on the bottom one, I pulled a couple of frames out and put them in the freezer, and I put frame foundation back in there, and that was about a month ago to give them some place so they would get honey bound. And then I've got those that I put in the freezer. I'm keeping those come fall. If they think they're light, I'm going to stick them back in there. But I just go with two deeps. And this year, for some reason, they've really been filling that 2nd deep. I think every hive I've gotten into, the 2nd deep is just solid with honey.
That's basically what I do. But if I have some hives that don't have the top box filled up, I'll, if they need some, I'll put them over there and not put them in the freezer, but then put preferably pulled frames into the bottom box. But sometimes you don't even have pulled frames, just put a new frame in there.
Yeah.
They'll do something with it.
Yep.
But I wouldn't add a 3rd deep, not in the fall.
I agree with Bob 100% on that. I wouldn't give them more space than they need in the fall. I think that the solution that Bob and Phil are talking about, Joe, are very common and good solutions. Sometimes the sort of textbook discussion on fall management includes what they call reversing the deeps. Sometimes folks will do that if the bottom box is full of honey, but there's some space in the top box, they'll reverse them. But ultimately, you just want enough space for her to lay. And I think if you do the calculations, which I did once, and I could probably do it again pretty quick. I can't remember how many cells you get per frame, per deep frame, but basically if you do the math, it comes out that the queen couldn't possibly lay up more than, I think it's 7 empty frames of deep frames with eggs before the brood would start emerging. Just the egg laying rate restricts her from being able to lay out too many frames. Now, that I wouldn't rely on that math too strongly, because everybody who's kept bees for a number of years have experienced more than 7 frames of brood. And so part of that is from an inefficient usage of the frames, or it's due to sometimes there's a daughter queen in there and they're laying up together. Sounds like that happens between 10 and 20% of the time based on what the scientists are telling us. But in the fall, at least, and going into winter, you're not going to have like huge brood populations. I think that having 7 or fewer empty frames, just something for her to lay in to keep the populations up, is what you're going for. Moving on, Mary, I got another question. How about going into winter with a single brood hive? Yeah, what are the chances of success of the bees making it through the winter with a single brood? Man, this is a lot of folks doing this now, and a lot of commercial beekeepers are overwintering single deeps. So I would love to hear somebody chime in on this, and I can mislead everybody on it if you want to hear my 2 cents. But anybody here in the group want to talk about
You can do it.
overwintering in singles?
You can do it, but you'll have to feed them the whole time. And there's several people that have the gallon or the gallon and a half buckets that they put directly down. Well, they put then they'll put the bucket directly down onto that. But you have to make sure that they're fed all the time. The little bit of heat that they get off the bees is partly what keeps the syrup from freezing. But like I said, you will have to feed them the whole time, and you will not want to run out, because then that's when your bees will starve. You can also put some candy boards or some mountain camp on it, which is basically damp sugar or sugar just piled in a pile. But there's a lot more that you need to do if you're going to do that through the winter. You need to keep up on it.
Personally, I'm really intrigued with the idea. I've never tried it, but I know that some beekeepers swear by it and seem to love it and do it successfully. But you're right, Bob, that the beekeepers I'm thinking of that do that, they all feed fondant in December, or they'll put candy boards on and make sure that there's plenty of food and that they're protected from the elements. So. And does it seem to you, Bob? Does it seem to you like they tend to stack their colonies at that point too? Because when you're overwintering singles, you can put 2 or 3 on top of each other, and they can share heat and increase the likelihood for survival that way.
Yeah, that's true. That'd be a good idea. I haven't talked to anybody that does that, but one person that I know does it quite a bit is Steve DeCaney, and they have it's either a gallon or a gallon and a half bucket, and they keep liquid syrup in that all winter.
Yeah.
And there's a beekeeper that passed away, Dean Sanders. He used to do the same thing. He used syrup from a ice cream factory or something. I'm not sure what it was, but he had to keep it in there year round. other than the honey flow. That's basically their store that takes the place of the second hive body being full of honey.
Another question from Joe here. Are any of you wrapping your hives with insulation for winter or going with best outcomes?
I can tell you what I do. I don't have any northern protection. My bees are right out in the wide open in my backyard, and I don't have any wind protection. All I do is put up a big piece of rigid foam on the north and west side of them. I just keep them protected like that, but I don't insulate the hives per se. I have an insulated cover that I put on, but and the vent box, but other than that, I don't do any kind of insulation on mine. They get through the winter fine. Even my top bar hives, I don't do anything with them, not even the foam board. They've got the back end of their hive faces north, so they've got all the honey and everything else in between, so I don't have any issue with weather down here. It's not like in Minnesota or something like that.
I have a few hives that I do that, but all those are in, like Phil says, unprotected areas. They might have something on the west side or the east side, but nothing on the north or south. I wrap them totally in 2-inch foam. I just slide it over the top and put the top cover back on. I made them years ago, but I only do those to a maximum of probably 4 to 5 hives. The rest of them are in areas that are protected or that I can put a snow fence to break up the wind. But on a single hive, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to put the foam over it and put the top cover on, and I'm done with it.
So thank you guys for your
The
input
weather never
there.
seems to get that bad around here.
So I would like to share a conversation that I had with Grant Gillard a couple of months ago, where he talked about how he wraps his hives with 2-inch insulation, rigid insulation, like what Bob was talking about, and Phil. I personally never did. And I always just prescribe to the idea that you don't wrap your hives in Missouri. And I've got some that are exposed and some that aren't. And I've got some that have screened open bottoms and some that don't. And I never noticed any correlation between who was wrapped or I didn't wrap anybody, but I never noticed correlation between who had an open bottom board and who didn't, who was protected from the wind real good and who wasn't. It just seemed like I just lost a random number of hives in terms of their location every year. And so I thought that was proof that wrapping them wouldn't make any difference. But when I was talking to Grant, he said he had started out with similar experiences and similar theories, and he wrapped, I think, if I remember correctly, I might be misquoting him here, but I think he said he wrapped all of his hives 2 years ago and had better outcomes overwintering than he ever had, and that now he wraps them all. And so we're talking about a guy who's, I mean, he's been president of the Missouri State Beekeeper Association. He's keeps like 100 colonies. The dude, he's written several books. He knows what he's talking about. So I think that I am probably going to do an experiment, Joe, to answer your question. And I'm going to pick a random a random 50% of my colonies this year. I'm going to wrap all of that 50%, and then I'm going to check outcomes and see how they do. But I think you would have gotten a lot more dismissive answers maybe from beekeepers, I don't know, a decade or two ago, but right now it seems like maybe it's there's folks that are doing it and having good luck with it, and it's worth a shot.
If I can add to that, one of the things I've found is that the bees can handle cold, but they can't handle being cold and wet. So I make sure I've got insulated inner covers with a vent on it and a box on, so the moist air can vent out of it, so I don't have a problem with moisture collecting in the hives. Other than that, like I said, I don't insulate the hives, and I've yet to lose a hive over the winter because of anything like that. That's
great input, Phil. That Joe, that it's nobody is arguing that humidity control is an issue in the hive in the winter. That's like, there's a lot of stuff that we argue about, but we don't argue about.
Yeah.
Cold, wet bees is bad. So you want to make sure 100% that you got good ventilation. The other thing is that a wise beekeeper once said that cold never killed bees, but starvation kills bees. And so to clear up the purpose of wrapping, you're not wrapping them so that they can be warm so that they don't get too cold. You're wrapping them so that they don't get so cold that the cluster can't shift. And so the idea of wrapping the colony is that it helps them to be able to get warm enough, at least intermittently through the days and weeks, that the colony can shift from location to location within the hive and access their food stores all year round. There's nothing sadder than opening up a colony in the springtime and finding a colony that's heavy and full of stores, but the bees starved to death on one side of the hive because they couldn't break cluster to get to those stores. So that's a real issue, and I think that the wrapping is meant to mitigate that more than it is to mitigate, them getting a chill.
I can attest what happens if they don't have enough food. I opened one of my top bar hives up this year, and I didn't take honey from them last year, and I thought they were fine. I didn't feed them heavy in the fall like I did the others. Open up, and there was dead bees in there, no honey. But I got lucked out. I had a swarm move into it, and they filled the box. So for net zero for anything for the year, but yeah. If they can't get to the food, they're going to starve. Any other questions? Anybody have anything they'd like to see at our next meeting? Something you'd like to see? For example, we've done 3 meetings with on-site meetings with the videos like we did Tom and Janice last month. Would you like to see something at the next, assuming we can't get back into in-person meeting again, something you'd like to see that you couldn't see at a regular meeting, but you could do like a remote video from it? If you got ideas, send them to Eric. We've talked about some things at a board meeting, but if somebody else had something they'd be really interested in, I'm sure he'd be glad to hear it.
Yep, you can email them to me, or you can comment in the comment group chat here. That'd be great too. Any one of those options is good. My email address should be available on the website. If you navigate to the officers section of the website, my email address should be there, I think. Guess I should check on that.
Do we have anything else from anyone? We're actually close to an hour, so not bad. I just wish you'd had more people on.
Well, again, we'll put this meeting up on YouTube so that everybody can refer back to it, and folks who weren't able to make it can watch.
Thank you, Eric. Well, if we don't have anything else, I guess we could call it a day. Stay safe out there. Take care of your bees, and they'll take care of you.
Thanks, folks, for coming.
Thank you. Bye.
Yep, take care.